Right. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, everyone who's joined. So today we're doing um, a bit of a different one. It's I'm not saying reaction or it's a sort of a response stream to Nordhugr, the Northern Spirit himself, who's also joined us today. Welcome.
Hey, thank you for having me on. I'm honored that you thought the video was worth diving into, that you found some value in it, and I'm super interested to hear your thoughts on it, what you agree with, what you disagree with, kind of if it got your mind spinning in different directions. So this will be a really fun show.
No, that's great. And I've just put, if people are wondering, if you're tuning in and you haven't seen the video, I recommend you stopping this stream or stopping this video if you're watching this later on. Go and watch Nordhuger's video on his channel, which I put a link on in the chat. It'll also be in the description. I'll put it in the comments as well, so you can all go and see it. Watch the length of it to understand that video essay, and then come back to here. Then you'll understand, and you should be able to understand the contents we're going to discuss now. Because if you haven't watched his video, it probably won't make much sense. And I Unfortunately, I can't play parts of the video because of my internet, and it would just it would just be jittery, so it wouldn't. So I just say watch it in your own time. Come back to this one, and um, you know, sort of go on from there. But I think a lot of people, Nord, have already who've sort of shown interest on this particular stream tonight on social media, um, have already watched it. So I think we're pretty safe in that regard.
That sounds good. Yeah, I'll do my best to kind of explain some of the concepts or try to catch people up to speed. But yeah, it really got. I knew, especially with how I titled it, how I structured the video and the thumbnail and everything, I knew it would definitely attract attention, and it got very polarized responses, which was what I was kind of hoping for because I like to be able to put something out. Maybe it stirs people up or tries to try to get people's minds spinning and thinking in ways that they may not have otherwise thought. And like with a lot of my videos, I may present my own conclusions, but I'm certainly open to having my mind being changed on some of these things because it's very experimental. We're dealing with very complicated thoughts of eschatology and characters and how religions syncretize in different ways and how beliefs are adopted by different peoples and how does that relate to the actual theology involved. So it's a messy subject, but I think that's what makes it fun, is because you go into it and it's stuff people believe or disbelieve passionately. They have strong personal convictions about, but it also deals with very primal forces, primal spiritual forces, elements of mythology that stretch back thousands of years. So it's very powerful material, and then just trying to get people thinking more about it. And if they walk away with a different conclusion, that's totally fine. But it's just fun to see. I like to kind of get that spark going and get people thinking.
That's good. And it's very because one thing that a few years ago I discovered when I a few years ago I discovered people like Spengler and Julius Evola and people who promote the cyclical view of history over the sort of I mean the modern sort of view of history, of course, is progress, and we see that today in every aspect of the mainstream historians and commentators and all sorts of people, and of course in the Christian conception it's linear histories are sort of viewed on the linear perspective, which some maybe more pagan types might sort of contribute to the development of the progressive view of history. But we're looking at cyclical view, and that sort of um, I mean, we've all seen that meme of the image of the fall of Rome. What is it? Strong times create weak men. Weak men create uh, hard times, and hard times create strong men. That sort of stuff. And I mean, that's a very bare, basic concept of it. But we understand that. there is a period of like a Bronze Age, an Ascendancy Age, a Golden Age, and then sort of a Decline Age, and then Age of the Ashes. And spoiler alerts, we're all in the Age of the Ashes at the moment.
Another reason, yeah, that's the other reason why I think talking about Ragnarok, talking about end times eschatology is particularly relevant now. It's like, okay, can we take some lessons from this? Can we take some lessons from scripture or from various mythologies and see how can we apply that now? And I just tend to resonate a lot. I mean, not just with Revelation, but also in particular with Norse end times mythology. I just find it so gripping, and there's this northern courage to it, which I talk about in the video, which is something that just kind of gets my soul on fire.
No, definitely, and I mean, I've always found Norse mythology interesting that there is a stronger connection to the people that the Norse gods than say like the Greek gods, because I mean, in Greek mythology, there's never a a Ragnarok or a period where there's a they're all in sort of mortal danger, and I mean, it's usually in Greek mythology there's somebody's trying to rape somebody else, but I I'm not joking. Every god
Oh
has
yeah, yeah,
stories,
all the
but
time.
yeah, it's all the time, all the time. Um, but you don't. I mean, you do have like sort of heroic imagery in Greek mythology. Don't get me wrong. Jason and Hercules and Homer's Iliad. You do have heroic elements in there. Um, but I do think Norse mythology is something which is a bit more grounded to. It's definitely grounded to a people. Um, and it um
And you were
so probably
talking about perennialism as well. Um, just to kind of go off that point, because that is kind of what you find is it's like perennial truths expressed in a particular way, in a particular place, in a way that resonates with a particular group of people. And I'm coming at it from a Christian perspective. I think people know that's where my beliefs are. I'm a Christian. I believe just kind of the straightforward scripture, but it nonetheless, I still hold to this idea that there are these perennial truths that do exist that are expressed or picked up on in different ways around the world and in different mythologies. So it's not something that, you know, there's this exclusivity to it. It's something that, not that, there are things that other cultures and religions and mythologies get wrong, you could say, but it's overall there's this kind of single root, and there's this way it's expressed in different ways in different times and places. I mean, do you
well no
what do you make of that kind of perennial viewpoint?
I think that's true. I think all races, all cultures, there's definitely. I mean, in my mind it's there's always a hierarchy, even in a spiritual metaphysical sense. There is a hierarchy, and there is a purpose to each deity. If we talk about in the pagan concept, there's a that and that it connects with everything in front of them. And I think this is one thing that a lot of people struggle to understand is in the pagan conception, everything is divine in not just the nature, but like the field in front of you, the stream, the river, the trees, all of it is just it's I mean, I on a previous stream, it sounds cringe, but I just said imagine imagine Skyrim, right? And how connected these the gods and these what are they like demonic Daedra creatures, how they connected they are to the world. That's how the people back then viewed largely viewed their relationships with you know their gods. It wasn't just like an abstract being which you go to in like a temple or church. It was actually there, present with them at all times. Every action they took, every emotion they felt, every um everything they saw it was either a sign or something. And I think that that's something um I think that came across in your video essay quite
Well,
well.
I think
And
that that also went away more. There was, I mean, there was this sort of separation, you could say, that came with Christianity, where things were viewed in different contexts at that point. But there was also a much different, there was a, what would you say, a mystification or a demystification that occurred, particularly around the Enlightenment, and a lot of
mm,
this sort of belief, a lot of this enchantment with the world, where everything kind of has its own magic to it. I mean, you could read, when you're reading the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, and like every other page they're talking about how there's this sign in the sky, and there's this comet, and this, this was portents of disaster, and oh, we saw flames in the distance of dragons. And there's this way in which they lived in this world that, uh continuing through the Christian age, basically until the Enlightenment, that the world around them did have this much more magical, enchanted quality to it, where everything was more interconnected with the divine elements of the world, or with, it may not be, this is a part of God, but it's, there's this extra level of life, level of possibility and magic to the world. And Thomas Carlyle describes what you were saying kind of about paganism very well in his lecture
yeah.
on Hero as Divinity, when he's talking about Odin specifically in Scandinavian mythology. And he says here, and I put it in the video, but he says, what the essence of Scandinavian, and indeed all of paganism, is a recognition of the forces of nature as godlike, as stupendous personal agencies, as gods and demons, not inconceivable to us. He says it is the infant thought of man opening itself with awe and wonder on this ever stupendous universe. I mean, mic drop right there. Like, that is profound. I mean, it's this there's this kind of like childlike wonder with the universe and with the world around us. And what we get now, and I think this is more of a consequence of enlightenment and excessive sort of scientific rigor, which is this sort of losing the enchantment, losing this childlike wonder at, opening itself up to the universe or to nature around us. It's like when a child sees an animal and they're just like in awe. They see a bear or something. It's this like transcendent experience. And what you get after that is like this sort of, oh, I've seen a bear before. Oh, I know everything there is to know about bears.
It's like
They're just these animals.
Richard Dawkins descends on the children of the woods and say, actually, let me tell you how the evolutionary biological makeup of the bear was formed. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. It's like the natural predisposition of man is to see a bear and see this extra life in it, and see this like, oh, that see something profound, a profound connection between you and the bear. And maybe that's expressed in terror, or maybe that's expressed in like wonder and the sort of naivety about this. But that's the sort of healthy, natural human instinct when encountering something in nature. And it's like that's beaten out of people. That's, you know kids lose that, but they lose it through more so through, having to learn about the world around them through textbooks, rather than, exploring in the forest, or, going out on their own and adventuring the way you would have in the Middle Ages or before.
I mean, I'm of the strong view that I will get onto our video discussion soon, because I know the time's of the essence with you. But I'm of the view that majority of people in the world can't handle knowledge or learning, because what they do is they can't critically think in a way which doesn't, produce toxic philosophies. I honestly, the more I look at the Enlightenment period, and going forward, I think that there is and looking today, of course, with modernity, that you know that maybe there was something to the idea of knowledge being sort of kept in a monastery, and only dealt by a select few. Yeah.
I mean, there may be something to that.
I know that sounds a bit mad, but it's something I've always considered, because the problem is you end up having these individuals. I know, like Richard Dawkins, who, okay, maybe an expert in one field, self-proclaimed expert in one field, but then they view their experts in all fields, and everything can be explained away with reason, logic, and and then they will support and do the most illogical and unreasonable thing going, behaving like tyrants or
What if we just put
behaving
chips in
like,
everyone's brains? Then we can
well, yes.
maximize efficiency.
Well, the purpose of life is just to grow the economy, and it's and to filter the masses through existence. I mean, that's the devil's work. I mean, I honestly believe that is the sort of that's what
Hmm,
hell is like. But anyway,
yeah.
we'll get on to the get on to the video. Um, so in your introduction, one of the first bits you talk about is the culmination of failures in relation to Ragnarok. So this this part is like the build up, what leads to Ragnarok, the um and from my understanding, this is sort of like a collapse of society, the collapse of normal society.
Right, right. Yeah, so I mean, you have this basically late stage of human civilization going on at the time, and I don't have a clear picture as to if the gods, if the Aesir are themselves, in a degraded state. It wouldn't. I mean, in some ways, it wouldn't even seem so because they're still fighting bravely until the end. But you certainly see with man, with human civilization, this great this great unraveling of morality, of virtue, of bonds of kinship, these things that keep human society functioning well, that keep morality, and keep a certain level of love and order and well structured civilization going, that these things have deteriorated at this point, that even before Ragnarok, it's not like humans are thriving at this stage. There's greed, lists greed, kinslaying, adultery, um, several other vices and issues at the time, and then this leads to the Fimbulwinter. So it leads to this 3-year extreme winter that kills pretty much everyone. So this sort of vice. So it ties. I mean, it is interesting because yeah, Ragnarok is tied to vice. It's tied to the degradation on a society wide level of mankind, and that's something you also see in Revelation as well.
Yeah, and as I mentioned there, I talk about like GDP growth, and that is the fixation that if it's bigger, it's better. If it's if it's wider, it's better. If it's growing, it is better. But the problem that you've got, and I'm just looking from a historical perspective with with like the Viking Age, and because I would say effectively from the raid on Linda's farm to maybe the North Sea Empire. It's difficult. Maybe I mean you'd have to really say Normandy if I'm using the correct context here. But if you
Mm.
look at the Norse, the Norse, the history of the Norse people, the Cimmerillion of the Norse people, um, it, there's that point in the Viking society because of course they spread out across England. You have the Danelaw, you have Guthrum taking East Anglia, you have the Kingdom of Dublin, you have the Outer Hebrides, you've got Iceland, Denmark, and then of course the Ruriks and the other Norse in modern day Russia. For the Varangians down further south, and there's this point where obviously their civilization comes global, and I was actually reading I got a book on Mark Morris, and this was in his Anglo-Saxon history, and he talks a bit. He didn't talk at length, but he talks towards the end when you have the emergence of it's mainly like round here Alfred and his war with Guthrum and other Viking hosts, the heathen army and all that, and he looks at what that because of the constant warfare, you have this really bizarre situation where all the men, are being levied by the jarls and the kings and these new kings, and you have the women are sort of left at home, Um, and I know that there's a lot of popular misconception with these whole shield maidens things, and the evidence for it in my mind there's no evidence of it at all.
Certainly minimal, certainly minimal in terms of archaeology or well, textually in the Gesta Danorum, there is a group of shield maidens that is mentioned, but it's the Gesta Danorum. It's always hard to know to what extent that is direct history and to what extent that is sort of a combination of mythologizing. I mean, certainly on the kind of the shield maiden tangent. I mean, it certainly makes sense that at different points in history, especially if you're fighting in an attrition war. I mean, you even see that like in the current conflict um, with not sure if we're supposed to mention this for YouTube, but the current conflict in Europe, where yeah, you do
In
have
Europe, yeah,
women getting put on the front lines. And that's not necessarily a statement of combat efficacy, and more so a statement of dire straits or leadership decisions. So it's yeah, there could be a lot of factors to that. I think the problem is when you get certain pop historians or certain people who motivated by ideology want to promote this idea that you know
yeah,
there was this age in the past where women were like Amazon warriors and were stronger than men
yeah.
and had you know had better
Girl boss,
reflexes and you know
yeah,
they're
girl boss
yeah
warriors
yeah
and
just
stuff.
promoting
Yeah,
basically this
yeah.
kind of silly girl boss narrative. So
I mean,
that's my hate to
yeah.
go on the tangent, but I had to do it.
No, no, no. I think you're correct. And but one thing that he sort of talks about is going back to Mark Morris is that you have this situation where the men are out of their way fighting, raiding, fighting, and then later on, of course, conquering and whether it be in, Northumberland or Mercia or Wessex, and then you have this point where the home is sort of left in control of like the sort of village or the farmstead wherever they're living. It's presumably their wives, maybe their older relatives. So you have this um and then of course you have slaves. At that time you had slaves in Ireland, um slaves from in and around Europe on the move, and um it's strange because he sort of referred to it as like a sort of Nordic globalization,
Mm,
which
yeah.
sounds ridiculous in some ways when you think about is, but at the same time, you can actually understand what he's sort of referring to, that they, because at this point you have this is just before the transition point for a lot of these Norse people where they go from being these raiders, these warriors, to actually being you know sort of kings and um administrators, where they actually become sort of rooted and civilized.
Yeah,
um
yeah. Oh, that's a great point. Was he kind of saying with this globalization process, um, was he saying this had effects kind of on the social dynamics at the time?
Yeah, so I mean, like for Guthrum, for example, now, and this was what I wanted to get on with, because largely on your sort of idea of Ragnarok completing, Christ completing the story of Ragnarok. One thing I would say is, you take the battle of uh, that. Hold on a sec, I'll just bring it. I get the two mixed up, you see, so I have to make sure I get the um. I believe it's the Battle of Eddington in Wiltshire. Hold on a sec. Yeah, that's the one. Um, where you have the armies of Wessex, which have been, you know, um, at this point, Wessex, it wasn't looking good for Wessex. They had a sort of an upswing, but it was sort of at this point, it was if they lost there, then the last Anglo-Saxon kingdom would fall. It most likely would have occurred that way. And you had Guthrum and his army, and um, there was a great battle, both shield walls and um, according to the Bishop Asa, of Wessex, that the usual stuff. God granted them victory, and overall, the Anglo-Saxons, they not just won a battlefield victory; it was a total victory, which was again in modern warfare. It's expected that when there's a battle or a war, that you don't just defeat your enemy; you absolutely like crush it. Like there's no army left; they're captured, everyone's defeated or killed. And of course, that was not common in warfare in human history. It wasn't a common thing. You have a battle, you may lose maybe 1,000, couple thousand, but both armies would then go away and either be in more fighting or there'd be some sort of agreement. But with this one, with Guthrum, it was a terrible defeat for the Vikings, and it resulted in him and his family being captured by Alfred. Alfred spared his life, which was a surprise for Guthrum because there was the Vikings believed that they would be killed because of of that sort of uh, I guess historic precedent with them and previous fighting, and
Yeah.
Alfred basically agreed to release him and the family, but it was on the condition that they were to be baptized, and Guthrum was very much up for it. In many ways, Guthrum actually seemed to be it wasn't like a conversion for convenience because he was in a difficult position, even though he was. In some ways, I think number one, he stuck with it. I think it was a genuine thing for him. I don't think it was a um, sort of a false conversion, let's say. And if
Yeah,
you look
yeah.
at
Well,
those
and
two battles,
keep going. Yeah.
yeah, but if you look at those two battles in one way, you could say that is like a Ragnarok battle in the armies of Christ and the armies of Odin of the Norse pantheon. And in that regard, um, and in the minds of Asa and Alfred and Guthrum, Christ, Asa says that I think Asa says Guthrum, said, well, their God has won out, their God has won.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was the age of it. There was almost a in some contexts, it's easy to look back at beliefs of people of the age and kind of apply our modern understanding to it. And certainly there were variances and levels of kind of depth to religious thought at the time. But I think for one thing, it's important to consider and keep in mind that Germanic paganism of the day was not a formal religion in the way that Christianity or Islam or Judaism is today. There was not a if you take, say, someone looking back, some sort of neo-pagan looking back, they may treat the Eddas as canon, so to speak, the way a Christian treats scripture as canon. But at the time, there wasn't, you know, it was a much more organic process. Beliefs were, the
Mm.
world kind of revealed itself in different ways. So it
It was all
wasn't
yeah.
this. Yeah, so like for Christ, for the introduction of another god, that was not a that was not like this totally foreign idea, because the way in which stories were revealed, it's like, well, you learn stuff as you get older and what you're told in your tribe and in your village, and what you're taught. It's like it's not like you're studying from a holy book and then someone brings a new holy book and says we're replacing your old holy book. It's like you're here. A lot of this is coming from stories, and it's coming from how things are being introduced in a much more piece by piece way. And Iron Duke has a great point. Yeah, Alfred the Great claimed descent from Woden. There was also this, there was not this belief for a very long time that a figure like Woden, the which is the English name for Odin, much like the German Wotan or Wuden, or the old Frisian Weda, or the Dutch Woden. It's like there was not this belief that for someone like Alfred, he's like, yeah, I'm a Christian, and also, of course, I'm descended from Woden. Like, these things are like, to someone like that, it's like obviously not incompatible because he's like, yeah, that's my ancestor.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because and that's the other important thing. A lot of people, especially historians, and I see them fumble over this all the time, is they struggle to conceive of the idea that pagans could be, in theory, Christianized, but they still remain pagan as well. If that makes sense, there's like this duality because it would take in the Anglo-Saxon thing in the time, and also when you look at the conversions of Bluetooth and in Norway and Sweden, that the actual rooting of Christianity didn't really take place in the masses for centuries. It was a it was
Right.
it, and even when it did, it never really um it, the pagan elements of mythology still there are still remained, um
Yeah.
and
Well, and I think what a lot of this. Sorry, I'm cutting you off. I apologize.
no, yes, I think a lot of people, because when we think about Christianization, we think of like epic, epic absolutes, right? Like with Constantine or something, he's there, and he on the Milvian Bridge, and he's like, no, reject all this, put Cairo on your shields, and swear allegiance to the one true God and everything. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding when you look at sort of on the Germanic front, and yeah, and as Alfred the Wessex, they would harken back to their descendants. That I mean, that was his. I mean, in many ways, Asa, because he was um, a Welsh bishop. He was Welsh, and he for him, because the Celtic people had been Christianized longer than the Saxons, and because of different cultures and racial civilizations, um, back then in particular, it's not true obviously today, but back then it was a very different civilization. For him, he very much existed in the idea of okay, there is one God, that's the absolute truth of that, and all aspects. But even he mentions the connection, the legitimacy for an Anglo-Saxon, United Anglo-Saxon England, solely rested in the House of Wessex because of their descendants um, of Woden. That was
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
the legitimacy.
and I mean, and there were even stories of like English monks who, they would believe that, sometimes they would encounter Odin when they'd be out on the road, or Woden. They would run into him, or someone who they believed to be Woden. So, and these were the learned, well taught, literate Christian men of their day, and they certainly didn't see that, because yeah, it is believing in these two set as though these are sort of independent sets of belief, and one must completely displace the other. And I think the other error too is viewing Christianity and viewing, kind of our older histories, as Brits, or as Scandies, or Germans, or whomever, as though Christianity is a culture. But Christianity is not a culture. It is something that is layered and enmeshed within culture, within a particular context, but it is not the context itself. And it is not, that's why Christianity manifests
Yeah,
itself very differently when you look to the Eastern
yeah,
Church versus when you look to Ethiopia versus when you look to sort of the instances of the samurai who became Christian, and they still manifest Christianity, or they within the context of their culture and within their own particular way. And I think one thing that frustrates me is seeing that constantly, and this comes both from Christians, from neo-pagans, from historians, this comes from everywhere, which is basically treating or claiming that anything that is pre let's say pre 1250, Like anything before that, oh, that's pagan. Or any element, what they really mean is
Yeah.
that's just old, that's just our old culture. And they just say, well, that just means it's pagan. It's like, you're kind of, they're kind of applying this strange religious drawing of lines to things that are just kind of our old ways of being, or our old elements of culture and aesthetics, and our old stories. So, and not that those didn't have their own particular religious or spiritual context to it that differs from the Christian spiritual context that that Christianity infused into the culture, but it's conflating culture as though it's like culture, our old culture is inherently pagan in a way that it's not like just our culture, or it's not like our natural ways of being expressing themselves in the world.
No, no, absolutely. And of course, uh, as Bowden once said in one of his speeches, he said race is a primary is what it's a primary source of identity. And Christianity, this is why I don't agree with like the concept of Christian nationalism. I know that you see it a bit in America, and it's been a bit of it in Europe, it's just it's incompatible, because you still it applies the idea that we can all be the same, because we all believe in this like universal this universal
Hmm.
religious movement, but at the same time that is, I mean, that is not the case. I mean, we even
So
see,
are
I
you
mean,
saying Christian nationalism fails because Christianity is not a nation, or isn't an ethnos, or isn't
no, it's not not
a
it's not,
culture?
no, I mean,
It's
is
Christianity,
Islamic
yeah, because
national
I think that's fair.
yeah
Like
is
Christianity isn't a culture.
no Islamic nationalism in that context, yeah, it could work because Islam is inextricably tied with Arab imperialism, Arab nationalism, because that was its founding thing. And then, I mean, yeah, you have your offshoots with the Shias in Persia, but fundamentally, something like Islam is tied with the Arab people. And you have pan-Arab, Arab movements throughout, especially the last century, where Islam and the Islamic faith played a crucial role in that. So yes, in that context, other religions certainly, yeah, I mean, and within the Hindu religion, definitely, because that's tied with the races of India. But with Christianity, no, that you can't apply it that way, because then you end up having universalism, and you sort of do a loophole back to egalitarianism and liberalism, and all the ills that come with it. Um, but I, I um I do think, the um the merits of, you know looking back to what we were saying about the uh primary source of identity here. I mean, fundamentally, it is race, and also identity can be informed by the landscape that they are surrounded by as well. And um uh, Tom Rousel, aka Survivor Jive, put out a tweet the other day, where he compared the flatlands of eastern England, Frisia, Sweden, and Denmark, and they all look exactly. I mean, they could be taken. These pictures could be the same place, from different angles. So there is that as well. That's tied to it. Um, but
Hmm.
yes,
No, that's very
I
interesting.
uh, I just want to. We'll try and get through as much as possible before you have to head off.
Yeah, and
Um,
I know you'd want to talk some too about kind of the Germanization of Christianity at some point too. I'm not sure, yeah, if you want to cover that
yeah.
in this
Well,
stream.
I tell if we go on to uh, Northern Courage, um, Spengler's civilization cycles, Nietzsche's defiant love of fate, particularly that one. That would be a good one to cover, and then maybe the Christ narrative and cyclical rebirth, the crux of it, of your conclusion to this. Yes. So uh, going to Northern Courage. So I think you talked a bit about it, but there is within within the within the people, the Norse people, that there was, and within their with their gods, there is a certain level of courage, which is something I think you described, which is not, it's not like the Greek gods or any other the Slavic pantheon. That this is a particular mindset of what would be valor, fight, sort of endless, sort of a battle. Could you just sort of expand on that? Because
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
that's a is that a Carlian concept? I'm
that's actually a Tolkien. That's actually pulling from a Tolkien lecture, quoting from him. So he says that the theory of northern courage, and he talks about that as being distinct from the Hellenic, from the Mediterranean idea of courage, as the northern there's this sort of northern enthusiasm, this northern extravagance, he calls it, or exultant form of warfare, which is reveling in the fight. It's loving the fatalism of it. It's embracing that. It's basically it is this kind of almost it's this, and you do see that in the Greek as well. You do see this love of a beautiful death, of dying nobly, dying heroically, but infused throughout kind of all levels of northern culture. And it's this, yeah, I mean, it's very profound. I think a lot of people resonate with it. This it's sort of the people joke it's like the male fantasy of defending a castle against waves of people trying to attack it. It's like this is just kind of an inborn love or natural instinct, and cowardice can suppress that. Other things can suppress that instinct, but most people have that to some degree, and particularly in a northern context, there is this very strong form of northern courage, and you see it embodied in Ragnarok as this, the end. Well, in two ways. One, which is the afterlife, the reward for being a great warrior, for dying in battle, is, hey, I mean, it's not just you go to Norse heaven, it's you go to some place where you get to fight more. That is the reward, is you get to fight more and die again. Congratulations. Which to some people might sound awful and be like, bro, I just died. I just lived this miserable life and I had to die in combat and now I got to die again. This sounds awful. But the northern courage element is like, dude, this is awesome. I got to live a crazy life on Earth and fight and die in battle. And now I get to fight and die in battle again with all my buddies and feast and drink with the gods and die with the gods. And this is going to be awesome.
No, that's right. And of course, how to word this without you, violence is a moral good from fundamentally. Okay, and I know this is okay. This is going to sound. I'm just trying to word it without
All
you
right,
to.
I'm interested to. Yeah, let's hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, okay. So I mean, if YouTube flags this, then whatever. I've already said it. So, on the
I respect
concept that
see
violence is
a northern someone from the past, a northerner of the past would certainly not just agree with that, but probably clap you on the back and say, "Hell yeah!"
yeah. So my concept of this that what makes civilization, what makes a civilization or a people great is effectively blood, steel, um, and war, because
Mm,
it's the natural state of man. And if you try and suppress it, as we see today, I think, like some people need things in their lives, and I believe, today we look at people with mental health and depression, high suicide rates. I do wonder deep down I'm not saying this is true, or but I do. There is a part of me that thinks, is it the fact that we have become so risk averse as a society that actually people need violence? But the problem is modern style warfare. It's it it is complete. I mean, it's completely dishonorable to that of when you have a spear and a shield, or an axe and a shield, or if you're a very wealthy individual, you can afford a sword and a shield in this context, and actually come toe to toe with your opponent face to face without explosives, without weapons which are can be fired from miles and miles away, by somebody sitting at a desk where there is no honor in that. Um,
Yeah.
there
I
is
mean,
no
yeah, that's very true.
there, there there is no sort of spirituality in that violence, because one thing that you find, especially when I read, say, like the Templars, or so I should say the First Crusade, you know, there was immense religiosity and spiritual fanaticism, especially on the Christian side, among the Normans, when they were, like the siege of Antioch, or battles in Anatolia. And I do, and again, that's very strange to conceive that, if especially maybe a person like Iron Duke in chat here, who was in the army, in a modern, relatively modern warfare context, that might be a very strange, or unthinkable thing to think about. But when you're facing thousands of enemies on horseback, and you're on horseback, and they've got spears and shields and swords and all that, um it, and you have, because because there is something different at play there, especially when your mission, your animating principle is, glory to God, um
Yeah,
or
well,
glories
we
to
should
the
all
gods.
I also wanna make clear too, the context in the past in Germanic society mattered greatly for violence because, it wasn't just violence is acceptable or encouraged in any context and people are just knifing each other all the time. Like, obviously,
Yeah.
then you wouldn't have a civilization and everyone would die and it would be, it'd be like Orc society in Warhammer 40K. It would just be it
Forward to get,
just
or
would
like what,
not work.
or, or like what, a lot of fans of Game of Thrones, when that's how they think, uh you know those sorts of,
Right,
like,
right.
medieval societies were operated. And yeah, I mean that, because you can't have a functional society like that. It's I mean, it obviously, stuff like that did happen, but that was the exception. It was very rare. I mean, like the example we use of Guthrum being defeated and his family being captured on the battlefield, that was an exceptional event. That wouldn't be a very common event in for the Norse, and of course, though, I mean, we know from, like, Asa, what he said, when that event happened, it spread throughout the Norse world. Within a year, you know, people would heard about what happened, because that was an exceptional event.
Right, right. And you can even see it in the legal code as well. I mean, it's a lot of it comes down to how you face death. So if someone's being executed, the challenge is okay, my job is to be executed as honorably as possible and try not to show pain, show fear. And if you're outside of that context, it's like everything has strict rules around it. So if you were to kill
Mm,
someone or if I should say you for the all right, whatever YouTube's algorithm is going to read that wrong. But if someone in the past in one of these societies was to murder someone and try to sneak off, and that would be cowardly, and that would be you could be outlawed for that. You could be killed for that if you were
yeah,
you know, killing in this sort of sneaky context. But if you were to, kill a man and then brag about it and say, "Yes, I have slain Guthrum. I have slain him by my sword, by my hand, and I fought him face to face, or we dueled in a home gang." This is the honorable way to do it. So and certainly there were blood feuds that were created from that, and I'm not saying that that was a great way to run society because you can read, a lot of this, especially the Icelandic sagas. When you're reading about these stories, it's like they turn into blood feuds, and a bunch of innocent people get killed, and it actually kind of ruins things. And a lot of these are tragedies as much as they are some sort of exaltation of violence. But there's the dichotomy, it's treated depending on the saga and depending on the context. It's treated either as, this is actually a great tragedy, and this sort of blood feuding is leading to this needless slaughter. But there's also an element too, which is, violence within a society will exist no matter what. And if there are certain spiritual contexts that elevate that to a higher level than, just what we have today with, say, modern warfare, that can still be a noble way to live and die. I mean, do you kind of see it in
Absolutely.
that sense?
No, I do, and I think Alfred, when he captured Guthrum and his family, his daughter, I think it was his daughter and his son and extended members of the family, and he could have, and there was, nothing would have stopped him, and there were probably many earls, aldermen with him, and his thanes who probably would have wanted him to kill them. They could take East Anglia, and that's the one of the commanders of the Viking hordes gone, and it would have saved a lot of time and trouble, and also the amount of destruction and what they inflicted on eastern part of Wessex. But in that moment, when he had the sword, I guess well, metaphysically speaking, not probably not practically, but he had their fate in his hands. He decided, you know, that he wasn't going to kill them. Instead, he was going to do the exact opposite and baptize them. And I think for him, because he Alfred, I don't believe he was completely literate. I think he was still, um, I think he did learn to read later on in life, but he was very much a fan. He was very much into mythology and poetry and stories. And no doubt he would have been Anglo-Saxon, possibly even Norse. Who knows? Um,
Yeah, I mean, there's almost something samurai like within this tradition of the warrior poet. The samurai were expected to be able to write a haiku, and then go into battle. And similarly, in the Germanic tradition among the Norse, and you kind of see this expressed in its own way with, say, King Alfred, the sort of warrior poet king. But
yeah.
it's, in the sagas as well, you hear stories of the warriors who are going out and they are composing a song or composing a poem about their battle, about their life leading up to this point. You see with, say, Harold Sigurdsson in 1066, when famously he's he's creating a poem as he's in battle fighting against the English.
No, absolutely. Um, and we'll just get on to the um, cyclical, just well, bit the cyclical concept of it was from Spengler and uh, the crux of your video essay, the Christ narrative and the rebirth and the completion of Ragnarok. Um, so Spengler viewed civilization, and by the way, you people should really check out your video because the editing on that there was you had number one. I just say very quickly, the video itself is excellent. There's plenty of images, even video clips interchanging. And on the Spengler one, it's an interview with the late um, oh God, I forgot his name. So late here, I forgot his name. Um,
Are you talking about
um, the
um
the guy that was like
sorry,
nearly
now
100.
now I'm blanking. Even though I just put him in the video.
I
Are
want
you
to
talking
say
about
Henry. Henry
Kissinger?
Kissinger.
Are you
Henry
talking about the
Kissinger. Thank you.
Kissinger interview?
The Kissinger interview. Yes, that's right.
Okay, perfect.
And
Yeah, sorry. I it totally, your brain froze up and then my brain froze up at the exact same time.
I was going to say Henry Winkler. No, so that's not it. That's definitely not him. Um, yes. Um, Henry Kissinger interview where he is talking about. I think the actual clip, I've seen it before, where he said that he gave a copy of Spengler's Decline and of the West to Richard Nixon, of all people.
Yeah.
Which which doesn't surprise me, because Richard Nixon definitely seems like somebody who was into, he seems like a bit of a philosopher. At when you look, especially some of his interviews, he definitely seems um to be on that. I mean, there's some of them, the ones that I thought were quite good, as you look at like the fall of the Soviet Union one in the 1990s. Anyway,
Mm.
um so
Well, it was
um
Spengler's graduate thesis. I mean, or sorry, not Spengler. It was Kissinger wrote his whole graduate thesis on Spengler's Decline of the West. So, I mean, this was something Kissinger. It wasn't just a passing interest of his. I mean, he was well studied on it because he
he's
found it to
well
be
studied.
useful
Yeah.
as like a
He,
predictive tool. And how do we factor in Spengler's analysis into our day-to-day decision making when we're talking about events on the world stage and the civilization we're trying to govern.
well, yes, and the idea that you have the ascendancy, the peak, and the descent, and the ashes, the fall, um and then the rebirth as well. It's always in the cycle. um and it and so this particular passage is, because this is where you get into the rebirth, is in your video essay. Your idea is that the rebirth is that of Christ. Christ completes Ragnarok and is effectively, the rebirth of that, from that. And the reason why I invited you here today was because I was actually, because when I was listening to it, I was thinking it from my historical point of view, that in some ways that is the case, because you see, after Guthrum, you see, he I believe his daughter daughter was married to Alfred's heir, so it united those two kingdoms. Um, I could be wrong. I know there was a point that there was this unification, and then the Danelaw would ultimately uh, be amalgamated into the a Anglo-Saxon England, one kingdom, under the House of Wessex. I think it was Alfred's grandson. Um, and you at that point, the Danes, and the Norwegians who remained in England, because again, not many came over to England. The numbers wasn't significant. Not like in the Western Isles of Scotland or Dublin, um, but they would be amalgamated, um, somewhat, by their conversions to Christianity. And then, of course, you will start to see the Christianization process through, Christians being present in Scandinavia, um, and then being active in the various courts, like in Denmark. Um, and you start to see the elite, the governing elites in those countries, um, adopting Christianity, and it was, very much a top-down thing. And the efforts were very much led by the Archbishopry at Bremen, in Germany. It was a very much organized from there, um, and so, you know beyond that, though, I think, that your analysis is correct. Um, I think, though, the on the grander scale, as I said, I think I said this before stream, and the way that I look at it is in the grand scheme of Germanic history, the actual, you know, the rebirth was the conversion, and then the ascendancy again, with the Normans, and then you had the descent and the because then you go into the realm of the conversation of, well, Christianity was then Germanized, and I think um, that's something we definitely see
I
beyond
think
going into
maybe
the millennium.
yeah, and I think maybe this in some ways the better statement would be Christianity for those Christians who were in northern lands was Germanized, or certainly took on its own particular German characteristics. You could say for Greeks who had been historically Christian for many hundreds of years up to that point, Christianity in those ways was still very Greek, very Roman, or you could say Eastern Roman in that way. It's
Yeah,
I don't know if those particular domains or Christianity as it existed in the Levant or in North Africa, if those regions of Christendom were Germanized. I think it's stronger to say that, in places that became, say, the heart of the Holy Roman Empire, or in England, or in Denmark, it's like those places still maintained or brought in their very own particular flavor. And you could even say the Reformation was in some senses a return, a re-Germanization of Christianity in that particular way. It was kind of going back to a form of Christianity that was more compatible with the tendencies of those people. But
yeah,
I
sort of
think
like
you're
a
probably better
sort of
read on the because there's a whole book on it that I people have recommended that I read, so I should really get to that. Is that have you read that particular book? It's like the Germanization of Christianity or something like that.
Yeah, well, there's one that's by Peter Heather, which I think is he's definitely a proponent. I mean, he's a bit of a shitlib, to be honest, but he's definitely a proponent of that, and he's got himself into. I mean, it's not a popular theory to be spouting in the academic circles. It's actually something that a lot of these historian types will come down on you on. The only reason I think about in that time is if you look at the turn of the say 1000 AD as sort of a rounded number, the Christian world at that point had, in theory, expanded. You had, and you have to remember, Spain was somewhat still overrun by the Muslims. You've had, North Africa, again, overrun, and you, um, you then have the sort of emergence of Anglo-Saxon um, monks, bishops, scholars playing a more active role in Christian society, in the
Mm,
church society. You have the Frankish, the Franks are the political and cultural sphere moves north. You in Germany in the East Francia, as it would be we will call it, or the what would then emerge into the Holy Roman Empire. You have these Saxons, you have your Swabians, you have your Franconians and Bavarians. Um, Maybe not the Bavarians because they're more Latinized Southern, culturally, but Swabia and above, plus the Scandinavian. Because one of the things that's quite interesting is when Denmark and Norway, uh, when their kings were adopted Christianity, one of the problems you had was that the first generation of bishops um, uh, uh, um, and monks who were Scandinavian themselves. First thing they wanted to do was they wanted to be independent of the uh, Archbishop of Bremen, because there was a German, it was or Saxon influence over them.
mm, right.
And at the same time, and the reason I say it got Germanized was this coincided with the schism of 10, what was it, 1053, 54, between the East and West, the
Yeah,
authority over East and West. And we know that there was the concept of authority, the uh, aspects of the scripture and procedure and all that. But in some ways, I think what had happened is you Christianity was, instead of being being the masses for the Latin and the Hellenic people, you end up having all these Nordic and Anglo-Saxon, and of course you had the Hungarians at this time and the Poles. Process had just started, and you, you end up having this. I guess for say like the Eastern Romans, this intolerable situation where you know the their sort of brethren in the West were not on, they weren't the same Christians. They just weren't. Um, and so that's um, that's how I sort of view it, in that regard. And I do think that that the Normans, for example, because at that point the Normans were one of the last Scandinavian, uh, I guess you say, sort of Norse invaders, who, because
yeah,
as soon as they arrived, they were given land in modern day Normandy. They converted to Christianity, and they very much adopted the. What was interesting with them is, and it's quite unusual in some regards, but they quickly adopted, the language and a lot of the sort of emerging French culture of the region. Um, but one thing they sort of kept was their um, martial skills, and so they were, they would then obviously, as we know, conquer England, work as mercenaries in Spain and well, around the whole of Europe, and of course forge the Hotfields would forge a state out in Sicily and Naples.
right. Yeah. Oh man, it's just the wildest. I mean, the Normans are just adventuring for forever. They love it.
Yeah, and they have that same northern spirit,
Yeah.
and
Almost
of course a lot.
restlessness, you could even say.
Yes,
And there's
yeah, rest.
I mean, it's the because what is the quote? Or Spengler has this line when he's talking about the Norse in particular, and we're talking about the Vikings. It's this some quote along the lines, or this phrase along the lines of, it's endless, was it dark yearning? It's like the Vikings who sent their boats out into the beyond, like with their dark yearning for the boundless. It's like,
Yeah,
dang, that is a line right there. That's like,
yeah,
talk about going hard.
it's
That's like,
yeah,
you could say
that
that's what
that's
the
like,
Normans carry over. They carry their dark yearning for the boundless.
yeah, and that's the English, that sort of became the English spirit with the the open seas,
Oh,
and it's very
100%. I
simple,
mean, and the English
and
have
it's
their own seafaring tradition as
yeah.
well.
No, and that's I think that's sort of the legacy of the Northern spirit. That's the continuation of it, manifesting in the English people.
Yeah,
Um,
like
s-
sailing
s-
around the world, like setting colonies in the harshest places. It's like, yeah, that's the same sort of like Faustian Viking energy that the English have, that, or you could even say like northern, sort of northern adventurousness. There's northern courage, and then there's the northern dark yearning for the boundless, as
as is,
Spengler
yeah.
would say.
And well, same could be said for Russia as well. I mean, Russia was founded by you know Norse people, the Ruriks, the Rurik dynasty under Rurik, and its greatest empire was then under the Romanovs, who of course were, uh, was it they were related to they were of a sort of a Prussian German house. Um, and so and of course they're, so for the high seas, for them, their sort of yearning was the great steppes, the
Mm.
open plains, the forests of Siberia. I mean, that was their
Endless sea of land.
and yeah, literally endless sea of land, and um, it's still that today. And the funny thing is, even most, I mean, I watched the interview with Putin. It's one of the things that I guess he sort of misses out, probably for a deliberate reason. But um, I think the you have this funny thing within like within the Normans or Rurik, the Norse there are able to govern completely alien people, but they do it so well that on paper it shouldn't be
Yeah,
possible.
they're invited, like, after a while.
Yeah,
They're, like,
and
invited back.
I've got this book. I've got a book on. It's called The Normans of the South, and it's I can't remember the author of it. It was published some time ago, but
I mean, I should say
there's
they're not invited initially. They're just but
they're they're invited as mercenaries, and then they just and
Right,
what
right.
happens is it's explained in the book. They're invited as mercenaries because the Lombards in the south are fighting the Eastern Romans, because there is this long protracted war in the south, and then of course you have the Muslims, North Africans taking Sicily, and when they arrive, more mercenaries arrive, and then when the Hortfields come to, that were more organized set of Norman house, they're sort of disgusted by the local Greek and Lombard populations, that they're so weak and feeble. There's this whole passage of how disgusted they are about how they were so weak and feeble, and that that us ruling them should be an honor, should be honored. Maybe so,
You could
and
even
and
say,
and
Putin's rationale, at least his historic rationale that he claims in the interview, I think that's just as much rationale that, you know, that's Norse land as well.
yeah, and of
So
course,
that's a
when they're sort of conquering, they're creating southern Italy, the kingdom of southern Italy. Um, the Pope with his army try and intervene. I think this is over like the Duchy of Benevento or something like that. There is some sort of disagreement. So there's actually a battle on the site of an old Roman battle, um, and the Pope is captured. And the funny thing is that, of course, this would be unthinkable at the time, but the Normans are, they're like, oh no, he's not captured. He's our invited guest, but he just can't leave. That was that was what they that's what they sent back to Rome, to the cardinals and the legate of Rome. It's like, no, he's not a prisoner. He's just a guest, but he can't leave until he agrees to what we want. You know, I mean
amazing.
they were so smithy and pilled. It's they just there was no like pretense to any of it. It's really quite entertaining, but yeah. Um,
That's
I,
amazing.
so I do want to um I do want, because there were some people who criticized this, like pagan types. I don't know. Did you have any sort of like tradcath types, or it come
I
back at you
didn't
at all on this?
that I'm surprised I didn't. Basically the 2 sets of responses I got on the video, about one half of the responses, or maybe 2/3 of the responses were, "Oh, this is brilliant, this is profound, I love it," and the other half was like, "This dude, you are, like, so far up your own, rear end," and, like, or
Yeah.
or it was like, or it was like, "Oh, this like, you don't get, you're, like, butchering paganism, or you don't, like, you don't get it," or this is like, "No, this does not make sense," or, "No, Christ and Odin are totally there's, like they have nothing in common." And maybe I'm being a bit uncharitable there, but that was the energy of some of the responses, and I think there may have been some confusion in how I structured the discussion in the video itself, because my claim was not that, Christ and Odin are the same figure at a profound level, or that they are that like Odin is Christ in a symbolic form or in this like the same archetype. And I think maybe that came from the confusion because I was talking about Spengler earlier, talking about Christ in the Helliand and some of these other and like Balder and some of these other figures as being part of a unified emerging archetype at the time. And
Yeah,
Christ in the Helliand is slightly different. I mean, there are a few distinctions between the Helliand and the Gospels, but it's kind of a Germanized form of the Gospels. But I think that may have been where some of the confusion came from. Again, I'm leaving it a little bit open ended. I'm not even 1000% convinced that I've come to this, perfect synergy or perfect way of like enmeshing elements of these stories together. But whenever you get, it's a very strange phenomenon when you try to take figures from one set of beliefs or one set of traditions and have them communicate with another set. So if you were to take, say, one pantheon, if you were to say to take the Greek pantheon and the take the Buddhist pantheon and have them like interact, like what happens? I don't know. That's like you're creating a pretty chaotic dynamic there, but maybe you'll get interesting things. And like
I
as a
mean the funny
Christian,
thing.
obviously, yeah.
I mean, the funny thing with that example is it did actually happen under the Macedonian Empire under Alexander the Great. You did have this. I mean, it didn't last though. It didn't last because, of
Mm.
course, after he died, it completely fell apart. You have the Bactrian kingdom. I think that was the you had your Buddhist, Hindu, Greek sort of society, and of course, it didn't last. And then you had your Seleucids with the Zoroastrian Hellenic pantheon, and of course those didn't last because the natural people, the races of the people who live there, just I wouldn't say rise up, but they just took back over again. You had the emergence of you had this the return to the old boundaries, the old settlements.
Well,
I
and
mean,
what we
yeah,
see happens, yeah. Well, and I think I'm kind of rediscovering something that already happened. I'm not sure I'm even really bringing that much new to the table in this conversation. I think it's just kind of approaching the process as it existed 1,000 years ago, and making
yeah,
claims that are not even as strong as something Spengler would claim. But it's a matter of in the history what seems to have happened is that the Norse pantheon, which was already viewed as progenitors, it sort of became more limited in its context, or it became sublimated. So it wasn't that this pantheon ceases to exist, but it's that this pantheon, these are venerated ancestors. These are men of
yeah,
greatness. These are basically like how you would look back at King Alfred, or let's say you were descended from King Alfred. You were to say, okay, I look to King Alfred as this like font of this extraordinary man of history, but maybe even a little more so because there's still some of this attribution of like magical abilities or supernatural prowess to these men. But it's like we're descended from these incredible men, but we worship Christ, or we worship God, and God is like at the top of this. And these are like, instead of being other gods in the pantheon, these are now like in a more limited context to being our ancestors who we're descended from and take inspiration from. And that's kind of where I was trying to go with this, is like that. I think that is the natural way, and it's stronger because the ancestral connection and the progenitor connection is stronger in Germanic belief than in other cultures. I'm not sure. I'm no expert in Buddhism. I have very little knowledge of Buddhism. So, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like do Buddhists believe that they are descended from the various gods within their belief system? It's like I don't know if that's how it works. And I'm not sure it was really the same within Hellenic tradition either. So there is kind of this there is a proper way for the Christian to view these stories and to view these figures. It's like that is the attempt. It's like Christ completes, basically, is the element that gives, or Christ, not just in a mythological element, but in an actual like tangible, real religious way, actually is the completion of the story, and brings hope and brings a path towards, or it brings a path to eternal life. That there is hope after Ragnarok, and you're not stuck to, if you die of sickness or something, you're not stuck going to Helheim and just freezing and being miserable for all eternity. It's like there actually is a hopeful path, and I think that's something that the Germanics picked up on and actually did find appeal. A lot of Germanics initially converted, or kind of fake converted for social reasons, or there was a lot of social pressure there, or economic, or threats of violence there. But there was also a huge number of people who actually did find it compelling and were saying, actually, this is a much more, it doesn't mean I have to. I'm not going to spurn my ancestors or spurn my traditions like that. That's a very modern way of looking at it. It's like that wasn't the
Yeah.
deal at the time. That's not how anyone viewed it at the time.
I mean, there
But
was a theory. There is a
it's
theory. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Continue.
no, that was the end of my thought.
Oh, I was going to say there was a theory. I remember. I think it was Peter Heather again. He sort of had the idea that there was um various sort of Norse rulers would have Christian either concubines or wives, and also like on the individual, like the warrior level, the various like what would they be, thanes or what have you. There would be like these
Hmm.
they would have these Christian wives from either Britain or Anglo-Saxon England or Ireland, and because they were Christian. And so when they would have children, the next generation of the various Viking clans, or
Mm.
they'd be brought up more in a Christian household, so it would just be normalized. It
Kind
wouldn't
of
be
similar
like
to, yeah, that was. I mean, that happened a lot in Rome. So
oh
I
yeah,
mean, that
Constantine.
as a
I mean
theory, I can
Constant.
I can totally follow.
Yeah, because Constantine the Great. I mean, technically he converted on his deathbed, but his wife, his mother was a Christian, his sister was a Christian, great deal of his family around him were Christian. He was the only one that wasn't. And I mean, I think there was political reasons why he didn't fully embrace it. Because even when he was around, they only made up about 10%, 10-15% of the Roman population. So it was there were reasons why it wasn't fully embraced by him. But yeah, I mean that was one theory. That's one theory, which could be that it was just it wasn't an alien, it wasn't like an alien religion, or totally foreign religion, for many. And also the it wouldn't have been lost on the Anglo-Saxons or the Norse that they are kin in some regards, that
Yeah,
they are kin, and that it's not like the relationship between I noticed the relationship between the Anglo-Saxons and the Norse, and how they treated, say, the Eastern Slavs, is very different. Um,
yeah,
and that would explain, because they understood that there was a kin, and they probably, I mean, I'm no expert on Anglo-Saxon language, but and the ancient Norse one, but I believe that. I can't remember where I read this, but they would be able to understand each other in some sort
yeah.
of like
They were mutually
broken way.
intelligible.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's sort of like talking to someone with a Glaswegian accent, maybe.
yeah. They could understand each other, so they would understand that they know they were kin and relationship, and that definitely played a major factor in it as well. So before, because I knew you're going to have to head off shortly. It's been we've already gone over the hour point. I was just going to, because one of the sort of critical, I guess, sort of critical feedbacks here, which I think is only helpful. The only helpful one that sort of
Sure,
opposes the
sure.
position was from. Um, sorry, you okay?
Oh no, I'm just saying. Yeah, I'm interested in this part.
Yeah, yeah. So it's from Raging Mandrill, who's a buddy of mine. He's Um, is he? What did you say? He's a pagan or a neo-pagan? I don't know how he describes it. I
I
know
don't
he's a
know.
pagan. No, I know he's been around in distant circles for a while, and he's um good chap to follow, and his fe critique, which I think actually is the most helpful one, because I can definitely see his point on this. Is that the biggest initial problem is the conflation between Odin and Christ. Odin dies gloriously in battle, defending his kin and kind. The return of the Aesir seems more natural, cyclical or cycle. Um, Christ dies on the cross and achieves victory over um, evil by being defeated, not the same thing. Um, and I mean, okay, so if we, the story of the Christ is not so much the, I mean, dying on the cross is the important point, but it's the in the suffering of man. But the key to it is obviously the resurrection. That's sort of the critical part of the story. It's the that's the whole point of the
Yeah.
story in some regards. Um, but I understand what he's saying, that Christ didn't really go out,
He didn't go
sword in
out
hand.
swinging is the
He didn't
I
go
think
out
is the
swinging. No, I mean, I guess, I mean, you could argue like the harrowing of hell. That's sort of
that is
not
yeah, I mean, that is the
like
I
an
think the elements of the warrior elements of God or the warrior elements of Christ, part of the challenge, I think, in grasping that is, to a Christian who believes in the reality of these things, it's it's not, strange for a Christian to be able to view or understand Christ as both, someone who is able to be meek and restrained and lay down his life peacefully, but also be someone who is capable of extreme, violence and warfare. That this is, but the where the issue comes in is that during his life on Earth, we don't see those. We don't see him like slaying armies around him. We don't see him like with a sword or spear, gutting someone. It's because those sorts of things, it's like that takes place in the harrowing of hell, or that takes place in the end times where Christ returns with a sword and he's come to judge the earth. And it's, you're seeing different sides of a very complex of God. Essentially, you're seeing God, the different ways in which God has all these different qualities to him. So, but you don't see that during his time when he came to preach. When he came and was helping the widow or helping the blind. You don't see the same outward manifestations of that warrior quality. But I think it's also important to make the distinction too is that being executed was not something that was what made someone being executed dignified or not, or made it glorious or not. It was always ideal, in the dramatic context, to die in battle, heroically, die in a cool way. But it was certainly not uncommon for warriors to be executed, and there was that. There's still stories of this where how you faced your execution mattered. Did you face your execution, blubbering and, oh, woe is me, or did you accept it and take your execution like a man and die heroically in that sense? And what we do see this sort of honorable, even though Christ is in many ways sort of humiliated by the Romans and spat on and beaten and like hung on the cross for 3 days. It's like that's a brutal, intentionally trying to be shameful, but still Christ takes
yeah, no,
that
yeah,
takes that
no,
death in an honorable way. And then, but the death is not the defeat. And I think that's the distinction is both, by that logic, well, Odin is also defeated. He's devoured. He fails in his battle. He doesn't kill everyone and then die. It's like, no, he's devoured. And he, maybe he puts up a good fight, but he's still defeated. And the distinction there is that, he doesn't resurrect, or at least we don't get to that part of the story yet. We haven't reached Ragnarok yet. So we don't,
no.
I guess, technically don't know, but it's alluded to that there's a new king that comes after Odin. Whereas in the Gospels and in Revelation, Christ returns from the grave and then also comes back to Earth and comes back in this grandiose way.
I mean, to look at it from a sort of pagan perspective here. I mean, if I was to sort of do a bit devil's advocate. By the way, I'm not. Um, I'm not sort of just to get sort of my understanding here of I don't identify as really either or in this sort of context. I sort of more of um I'm sort of more interested on sort of the energy side and the um of eras of that, and look more focusing on that. But if I was to sort of play devil's advocate here on the pagan side, I would argue the problem is that the foundations of Christianity in some regards is that on death. And the problem is death and resurrection, but for the Christians themselves, it is the concept of death. And it's that all that in the pagan world, it's life which is that is miraculous, and that is sacred, not death. And
Hmm.
um and also the other thing, which is, as you mentioned, the cross at the time was it was considered in Roman society, and then it would have been known even now in Judea that it was a humiliating death. It was something that was done to um you
Criminals.
rebels, traitors,
Yeah.
miscreants, all sorts. And the Christians would then adopt the cross as their symbol. I mean, because there are many symbols at the start. The fish symbol, which is there's Cairo and everything. So there was different multiple symbols, but that would become the sort of a symbol that they would adopt themselves. And so there is that. And then of course you have the martyrdom aspect. So the willingness to go to to death. And there is the argument that they'd probably make is that there's an element of victimhood here, that they're seeking out victimhood, which is
Hmm.
not a heroic trait. I mean, how, and I know because I've seen pagans made that sort of argument before in the past in previous conversations.
Yep. Yeah. No, I think that's certainly important to hear that and to respond to that because Jonathan Pageau. Are you familiar with Jonathan Pageau? He has this really interesting. He's a Eastern Orthodox guy, but he has this really interesting symbolism analysis that he does, and he talks about how Christ in many ways embodies opposites, and you see this particularly on the cross. He is simultaneously the the most powerful king that exists, yet he humbles himself to become a man. He is he is killed, but then he is brought back. He returns to
Mm,
life. He's the purest, but he is given the greatest burden of sin, even though he's the most innocent. He's um he's this being of he's God, but he's goes to hell and then you know scours hell. So it's like, and there are many other ways too. Yeah, so he's that who is the victim. So he is the victim in the case of the cross, but he's also the judge. So he's the judge, at the end times. So he's all of
mm,
these things embodied into one. So it's easy to look at Christ and only see one element or another element and say, that's why you get people who say, oh, God is this or God is that, or Christ is I don't know, insert whatever, you'll see this when people are trying to push some particular thing or some particular like really ham-fisted political message. Say, actually Jesus was this. Or they'll say,
yeah,
well, actually
yeah.
Jesus was that. Or you'll even see other
Jesus,
people do.
yeah, like Jesus was libertarian. No, Jesus was a communist. No, Jesus was a socialist. No, Jesus was an eco warrior. I mean, yeah, I mean, we
Yeah,
see
exactly, exactly.
all justifications from that. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. And
Um,
you can probably find textual or you can take quotes out of context or something and find ways to kind of make your own version of Jesus that's anything you want him to be because Christ is in many ways this synthesis of extremes. If there's one thing you can say about him, he's certainly not room temperature He's certainly not lukewarm. He's he's very bold. He's a very bold figure who's kind of challenging to every paradigm. So there's that radical element of Christ, but he does embody opposites in so many ways. So he's the
Yeah, I mean,
warrior,
because
but he's also humble and allows himself to be killed, and he also returns and also comes back with the sword to rule the world the end of days. So it's all these elements. Like, you can say certain statements that are true, but it's very easy to miss the broader context and the broader narrative arc.
yeah, I mean, the famous one that is levied is the turn the other cheek. Um, And then at the same time, during the Last Supper, Christ, what he says is, "Sell your cloak and buy a sword." You know, um,
Right, exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and of course, most people, fedora hats included, would say, "Oh, there we go. There's a contradiction there. You go. It's not consistent." Um, but I mean, when you look into it, that you can fundamentally interpret it in a way that you can look at. I mean, for me, the way that the way that, and it's really hard to understand Christ and aspects of the Bible. It can be really hard when you look into the way that I sort of l- come to frame it is effectively his mission in his mind was to build the kingdom of heaven and to prepare everyone for it. He was following
Right.
a prophecy. Basically, he was directly following a prophecy, so he was living in the material world, but his mind and his focus was on the metaphysical world of realm of existence. So that's why he never, when asked about the Roman Empire or some of that, so render unto Caesar's which is Caesar's, render unto God which is
Yeah,
God.
he's like,
So
this is small relative to my kingdom. He's like, "Oh, this is, the Roman Empire may seem big to you, but, in the time scale and in the vision of what's to come and what is being built and what I'm building here, the Roman Empire is a small fish in a very large ocean, or compared to my actual kingdom."
yeah, I mean, he has no interest or no sort of drive for anything in the existing there and now, and so yeah, I mean, I
Well,
think that's
although I will say, I mean, he certainly cares about the people he encounters. He certainly cares about, healing those who come to him, and
oh yeah, yeah, I mean, I mean, like on. He, like, for instance, he's not concerned with like the he's the one that sort of controls the narrative. It's not the masses don't control him, that sort of thing. He's
right,
not
right, yeah,
led
yeah, yeah.
by
He's not getting
the
caught up
masses.
in, yeah, he's not getting caught up in, like, okay, what's the of this village or this country I'm in, what's the tax code?
Yeah,
What's this regulation 34B? Ah, we
yeah,
got to fix this. He's like almost saying, and I don't want to speak for God or anything, but it's almost kind of like, all right, guys, please think a little bigger here. Try to, try to open your minds a little bit. Think a little bigger picture than the very kind of small political machinations of your era.
yeah. And then you look at the people he chose to carry his message. I mean, it's um when you look at someone like Paul, Saul, for example, the greatest persecutor becoming his greatest proselytizer. Um, and while um, it, I think what it shows is um, you know, I was going to say dissident network of tens here, but he wanted, he chose people who were effectively, somewhat warrior in spirit, or because you think about, like, the one of the first converts was a Roman centurion. If we're
Right,
to,
right.
so there is this, you know
Well, you
if
also
you look in
see,
in
well, just to make a quick comment about that, I mean, you also don't see, Christ will tell other people, Jesus will tell other people, he'll say, okay, if they're living in sin or they're doing something sinful, he'll be like, all right, now follow me, or you know, he'll he'll kind of help them out of their place, but also say, now, no, go and sin no more, no longer keep sinning on this path. But it's interesting that he doesn't say that to the centurion. He doesn't say, okay, now stop being a centurion, go lay down your arms and join a hippie commune. You don't hear that. If anything, he's amazed by the centurion. He's like, he's amazed by the faith that the centurion has, because the centurion says, I can go, because he approaches Jesus and he says, because they're far away from where the centurion is, and he says, I have a daughter who's sick, and I can tell one of my soldiers go, and he goes over there, or I can tell him come and go over here, and he does that. So I believe that you can, command, the forces at your disposal to heal my daughter from anywhere you are. And you know Jesus, he's amazed at the faith and says, your daughter is healed. And then he goes back and his daughter's healed.
No,
Yeah, i'm going
and
i'm going a little off trail, but I get excited about this stuff. I love it.
no, it's interesting stuff. And I mean, for me, where you I think where and this goes back to our foundation thing of maybe where Christianity had to be Germanized, is because the actual foundations of the church fathers, which we'll talk we're getting on to, like with Paul and those that came after, Peter and Paul, um, is effectively it was fermented in Greek civilization, because what Paul did
Yeah,
was he went, it was with the Gentiles, it was away from the Jewish people, because um the message, what I can't talk about on YouTube, but anyway, so the point is, it went for the Gentiles, and the conflicts that led from there, about Gentiles entering the temple and all that, um and you see in the first century, the split, you know and in some ways, I mean, I had one of my professors back in the day. His very much idea was the foundations of Christianity was very much a Greek. It was a Greek religion in some
mm,
ways.
hmm,
It's his understanding of it, which made sense, because the first people who were to convert to Christianity were mainly pagan
yeah,
Gentiles of either Greek ethnicity and culture, or just Greek culture. So this would be what was Eastern Roman Empire, from Egypt, the Levant, in Anatolia, and mainland Greece today.
yeah.
You
Yeah, there's an extremely heavy, I mean, not only, a lot of it, you have a lot of writings in Greek, but also, Paul is in Athens, and he's, day after day discussing philosophy with the Athenians, and discussing God and
Yeah,
discussing all these things. And it's, explaining it in Greek terms in ways that are familiar to the Greeks, and the Greeks are
and
kind of
they were
understanding it.
yeah, I mean, they were quite intrigued with the concept of a singular God as well.
Right, and
The
Plato, I
various
mean, Plato
people.
had been working on that up to that point too, so there were these foundations, these sort of philosophical and religious
Yeah,
foundations that were building up to this moment, so it was kind of the culmination of a lot of philosophical thought, religious thought up until that point. And Paul comes in and he's like, here's the logos, here's the missing piece that completes your philosophical project here. And it's like, this is Christ. He completes your project. And that's kind of what I
yeah,
was attempting to explain in the video, is like, in a very similar way, Ragnarok, it's like Odin's looking for the mystery of how do I survive Ragnarok? It's like, and then you come with, okay, here's this missing piece, and it's Christ, and he completes
yeah.
Ragnarok.
I mean, Paul did have his naysayers. I think, if I remember correctly, it was when he talked about the virgin birth, that there was some in the some in Athens, and like when they were debating in the forum, and on the hill, it's like, oh no, I'm not having that. So
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. A lot of that.
yeah, a lot of that. So a bit like you with your naysayers.
Oh yeah, but hey, I mean, if you don't have some naysayers, you're not saying anything worth anything.
No, so well, what Bowden said, the most radical thing you can do is to read, and think, reading and thinking.
Hmm.
You know, it's the most radical thing because um, it, it's what, um, and especially if you're going against popular mass conception, because all these people, and it's why probably a lot of people on the dissident right and a lot of the content creators have a sort of fascination with people like the early Christians, or even maybe pagan late stage pagans when they were a minority in sort of a Christian world, was that you're going against the masses, because there is nothing good you can find in the masses. It's about the it's about I was going to say being like, I'm going to say like a revolution, but like a radical, like a radical thinker,
Hmm. Yeah.
if that
Yeah.
makes sense. Yeah, it's
Well,
it's
I
it's, it's
would
like a sort
say,
of like,
oh yeah, yeah. Keep going.
yeah, it's causing, not causing chaos, but shaking something that you oppose to its core.
Hmm. Right. Right. Being willing to kind of re-examine on that foundational level,
Yeah.
and I would say
Especially
too. Oh, sorry,
sorry, go
sorry. I
ahead.
keep cutting you off. I think it's the lag. I think it's this
Th-
Atlantic
yeah, there's
internet
a
lag just delays things by like a half a second.
yeah, I think that's the case. Yeah, and um, I think with you in Paul's case, you end up seeing Christianity become all the ultimately they all sacrificed, and they all martyred in the end, in one way or another. But what they show, especially Paul, is he's made able to draw from, because the thing there is, they don't really draw from the masses. It's usually, like in Lydia, for example, there's this merchant and she's I can't remember her name now, but she's sort of fascinated with, enamored by his speeches, and becomes a follower, like an early follower. So there is definitely this targeting of elites.
Yeah.
Um, it's not, I don't think successful religion is not that for the masses. Cults are for masses, for the masses. I mean, well, I shouldn't say that. That's not correct entirely. You do have esoteric cults, which is secretive, so it's not masses. But I don't believe that it's I don't believe that that you can found a religion or a cult purely on the masses. It has to be a select few.
Right. Well, and there are kind of layers of mysteries within the better structured religions where there's kind of the simpler layer that can be grasped by everyone, and then there's slightly more complexity and more esoteric elements to it, which the more theologically minded and the more profound thinkers are the ones who are always kind of seeking after what's the next layer of meaning to something. They can kind of dig into that further, and there's a layer that appeals to you could say the priestly class, or to those who are kind of obsessively trying to uncover mysteries or study the deepest layers of a religion or a belief system.
Yeah, no, definitely. Um, I think that's probably about it. I don't know. Have you got anything else to add at all? I think
Beautiful.
we've
Yeah, I would just say, just kind of on the point about I'll probably save that for another stream. But dude, this has been awesome. This got me fired up. Yeah, I'd say if you're not familiar, if people have told you, Jesus is this way or Jesus is that way, I've told you this kind of weird caricature, it's like, go investigate for yourself. Go, read through the gospels, download the Bible app, listen to the cool King James audio version that has a great narrator who's got this like crazy voice. It's awesome. But just kind of look into it for yourself. Yeah, certainly study. There's great value in mythology in this sorts of stuff we're talking about, and I think it's worth exploring for yourself.
Yes. If you nor do you know are you familiar with Fallout, the video game
The video
franchise?
game, just the basics.
Yeah, so there's a character in Fallout New Vegas called Joshua Graham. He's known
Oh,
as the
right,
Burnt
right, yeah.
Man, and he's like because he's like a Mormon figure in the game. He's like this uber badass, vengeful, revenge driven, against the Legion who burned him. He has all these this bandages around him, everything, and he quotes Bible verses and or Book of Mormon, but also Bible verses. I know it's a bit anyway. The point is, um, he there's somebody I think with AI used his voice to as an audio for the King James Bible as
Dude,
well.
I listened to a couple books of the Bible in Joshua Graham's narration. It's amazing.
Yeah. So if you really want to have like, I mean, the voice actor
If you
for
want
him,
the
I don't know
authentic
who the
experience, that's the one to
I
listen
know
to.
it's absolutely crazy because they also have like the ambient and like Zion National Park music that
And
they have
they
in the
have
game in the background.
there's a great one where it's like the video is just a loop of him reloading and checking pistols and like ammunition. It's hilarious.
Yeah, and he's just like quoting Bible verses. And I've yet to get to the spicy, Saint Ignace, Saint Ignatius of Antioch, or um I wonder. I just want Bishop Cyril of Alexandria. There's a few spicy things he says, isn't there, on a
I'll
few
have to
people.
I haven't read his writing, so I'll have to put that on my list.
I have got well, there's a bit that's I don't know if we don't know if he actually said it. There's a bit I think it was this was claimed what he said like 100 years later by someone else, so obviously he wouldn't have known. But um he um he has like a sort of a speech that he delivers on the other Abrahamic faith in the region at the time, and yeah, I mean
Very very
that's
critical, I imagine.
oh bloody hell, that's yeah.
Well, I
There's
mean,
actually a film.
St.
There's a
Paul and Jesus are too at the time, so it's not
yeah. I
we're
mean,
not necessarily out of step.
no, but the funny thing with Cyril is that there's a film. I don't know if you've seen it. It's called Agora. It's
No.
2009 film. It's about Hypatia of Alexandria and arrestees, and you got Bishop Cyril in there, and you've got uh, we got the Bishop of Cyrene, who I can't remember his name now. But it's a very interesting one because I mean, it's not historically accurate in most sense, but there is a few interesting things. And this was done at a time where it was like atheism was cool, so they wanted to make the Christians look bad. But
Mm.
I don't know if this was intentional or unintentional by the writer. Because I think it was like a Spanish. It was. He had like what's her name? Rachel Weisel. There was quite a high profile actors in there, like British actors and American actors, and yeah, it's about like set in 400 AD or 390 AD. And it's basically the conflict between the Christians and pagans and Jews, and there's a monologue in there of Bishop Cyril towards the end of the film where the the uh, the Jews have attacked like his church, and yeah, he delivers that monologue that is referenced in there that he actually delivered, and yeah, as I say, that is some spicy
Huh.
stuff.
Interesting,
Uh,
interesting.
it literally there's a chant that he does like at the end where it's like cursed and exiled.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, he just like whips up a mob and everything, and as I say, wild. It's I might do a film review of that. I mean, I'm not of that scene though. I don't think YouTube would allow me, but the film itself is quite interesting because even though it's there to paint the Christians in the bad light, it actually does the opposite in some regards. It sort of shows
Huh.
the pagans to be a bunch of elitists, like the Neoplatonists and the pagans to be elitist and as irrational as the Christians, that they try and
Huh.
make them look. Yeah,
Interesting. Cool. Cool. Well, hey, I just want to thank you so much for doing this analysis, kind of getting your thoughts, finding it to be something
yeah,
worthwhile to dive into more. I always love um, talking about these matters of
yeah.
history and mythology, talking about the Bible. I love it. I love it. It's great.
No, I mean, I think there is something to it, and I think it's something, that I think I I mean, I don't really know, but I think it's something that Carlyle and other people have sort of confronted or tried to reconcile the two in the past. I think there is definitely something to it. I think it's a definitely there is definitely sort of meat to that particular theory. It's
Yeah, well, I
and
think it was reconciled, but what has happened since then is that a Christianity has totally fallen apart
it's weak.
in the
It's become
West.
weak, and it's become weak and affirmative, and it's
Yeah,
it. I mean, we live in the age. I won't say live in the age of the ashes. We live in the age of like hyper femininity, and so that's what
and a
Christianity,
and a
like all
dysfunctional and
institutions.
a dysfunctional form of femininity at that. So it's not even an
Yeah,
ideal
yeah, yeah,
version. So it's
yeah.
like just abysmal all around.
Feministity or whatever. Yeah, we've
Yeah,
got
yeah,
just
yeah.
I,
Uh,
I mean, like all political I can't say the word, but English cigarettes. So um, yeah,
Yeah, so I mean, things have
yeah,
gotten to a pretty bad state in Christianity, and Western aesthetics have also fallen apart
yeah.
completely, and
I mean,
kind
I
of
can't go.
getting in touch with nature has fallen apart. So I think
I mean, yeah.
anything that evokes something which is counter to our current degraded form of Christianity or our current form of Western irreligiosity, anything that's counter to that, people find appealing. So there is kind of always that draw to something which is distinctly different. Although,
Yeah, I mean, and the purpose of these things is, as I go back, what we're doing is we are, even in video essay format or writing, it's keeping that of the old world alive in what we're doing. It's
right,
keeping
right,
those ideas alive. It's keeping that conversation going. It's actually, as Bowden would say, this is the form of radicalism. He was talking about thinking, and because this sorts of conversations, of course, it's not you won't have it in any mainstream publication or interview or anything. This is something you would. This is a discussion that would not take place because all the betters have reasoned and rationalised their way out of the idea that race is informs culture, and culture informs how people behave with religion, and people. Not everyone is like some super Machiavellian Game of Thrones character who just sees the world as something that can be used and that they can just as a tool of their use and everything. So
fantastic.
um,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean that's good. Anyway, thanks for coming on, and thanks for coming on. Thank everyone in chat for coming. Vingle, Iron Duke, um, Nathan, who's here as well. Thank you, sir, for coming on. And I'm just going to see who else. So, old John Cinder was here earlier. Thank you. And Confusion and Delay. And Martinez Capella, who that's a new one. I don't know who that is, but thanks for coming, joining the stream anyway. It's been really good, and people watching afterwards as well. I hope you all enjoy. And please do go before you watch the stream. If you stumble across this later, please go and watch Nordhugr's stream first, so you get an understanding of what we're discussing here, and then watch this. The link will be in the description below. But no, apart from that, thank you all, and good night.